And, thankfully I came to the conclusion that my kids are going to want me around even if I'm broke. They're going to rather have me alive and broke rather than an insurance check and this massive hole in their heart. And that was really the first time in several years that I actually put integrity ahead of any other choice, especially success. Because, up until that point, when I was at that corner, that intersection of success and integrity, I was unfortunately choosing success. I was trying to keep that identity alive and it almost killed me. And thankfully, that's just thinking of my sons, it kept me alive and gave me a chance to actually correct those character traits that got me to that point.
What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for. What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? And folks, don't forget to follow, subscribe, share this thing out, like it up. It really helps the show, and I appreciate it. So who are we talking to today on Nightmare Success? Well, we are talking to Sean Mueller, and he's got an incredibly interesting story. It's all around the hedge fund world, and when this all happened was a time period of the Bernie Madoff world, and everybody had just gone crazy on Wall Street. Well, Sean happened to be in that business, and they were handing out sentences at that time, and double, triple, quadruple what they would in the time before this. And Sean got wrapped up in all that. A little bit about Sean. He was a hedge fund manager, and he began his finance career after being hired as a stockbroker without a college degree. He later founded and managed his own hedge fund called the Mueller Capital, raising over 100 million before a series of ethical blind spots driven by performance first thinking culminated in a 14-year sentence in state prison for securities fraud. After his release, Sean returned to higher education, earned a Bachelor of Arts in Communication, graduated summa cum laude, and being named a finalist for Undergraduate Student of the Year. He's got a book coming out, folks. It'll be a good one. It's called Fuel to Change, Turning Setback into Strength. Today, Sean speaks to leadership, compliance, and professional audiences about ethical decision-making under pressure, the psychology of misconduct, and how setbacks can be transformed into lasting strength. He also serves on the University of Colorado Denver Prison Education Program Advisory Board, which is wonderful. We're going to want to talk about that because that's just stuff that helps people while they're in to get equipped to come out for reentry, and reentry isn't easy. And we know that. I can't wait to jump into all this. But before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots looking for a car, and then you spend 4 or 5 hours in a dealership to buy a car? It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Folks, I want to share with you a powerful and moving new book you won't want to miss. My Name is Saffron. Voices, silenced, stifled, and taken away by author Saffron Gustafson. This isn't just a story. It's a journey through resilience, survival, and reclaiming your voice after being silenced for far too long. Saffron's story takes you inside the hidden struggles, the pain, and ultimately the triumph of refusing to be defined by circumstances. As Saffron was putting the finishing touches on her book, the prison she had just been released from, Federal Dublin FCI, was permanently closed because of sexual abuse of the women prisoners. If you've ever wondered what it takes to rise from the darkness of places, to find your truth, and to speak it boldly, this book will inspire you. Pick up your copy of My Name is Saffron today, available now on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Trust me, you'll be moved, challenged, and changed by her story. Welcome in, Sean Mueller. How are you?
Hey, good. Thanks, Brent. Good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. So, Sean, your story, we talked a lot on the phone the other day about just how this all happened and the moments that happened that where you had decisions to make, and those decisions, you take a left turn or a right turn, and how that changes the pathway of your life. Take us back a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Sean growing up before all this happened. Siblings, parents, where you were.
Right. So, Brent, my dad was born in Kansas during the Great Depression, grew up on a farm. My mom grew up in Ireland and was raised in an orphanage run by Irish Catholic nuns. Both had obviously difficult childhoods. They both grew up without moms. They met during World War II in England and came to America, started a family, had 7 kids. Dad worked a blue collar job. We always had a roof. We always had food. Obviously, growing up, with 7 kids, that's tough to, have any extras. So I was constantly seeing capitalism on TV and the movies and realized, wow, seemed like those people had no problems in life because I just justified, well, they have money, so they must be doing all right. So I started reading stocks and business books when I was about 12, 13 years old. Really wasn't a great student in high school, but still got to college. Got to college, realized, wow, this is horrible because I was having to sit through psychology, philosophy, sociology classes. And in my head, I was there to learn how to make money. And I didn't feel like those classes were doing me any favor, trying to help me get to that point of making money. So unfortunately, I started skipping those classes and going to the school library, reading more business books. And after a couple of years of this, couple of semesters, I'm realizing this is an absolute waste of time and money right now. I need to move on. And so I got a job, and it was interesting because then I realized after a couple of years of working full time, I need to go back and get a degree because I want to be a stockbroker, and no one's going to hire me without that degree. So I did it for a semester. Suddenly I was a really good student because I understood what I was there for and was willing to play the game. I'll go to your classes. I want the degree. Well, after a semester, unfortunately, I ran out of money and had to get a job. I saw an ad for a stockbroker job, said you needed a degree, applied for it anyway, went to the interview, ended up getting the job because they realized I understood about the market more than a typical starting broker would. They gave me a shot and it all worked out. But unfortunately, the more I got into
Wow.
that business, the more I just kept reading about stocks and business, doubling down on that one-sided education. And after a few years, I ended up taking over the firm's management position. I was the principal, did that for a bit, and realized I wanted to trade stocks and opened up a hedge fund a while after that. And it was just straight success right from the get-go, right from the start of it. I was trading stocks, options, futures,
Well,
short term.
Sean, let's talk a little bit about the rise, because at a young age you came from a family that had 7 kids. I can't imagine, that's a lot of kids. Where did you fall into the order of that with 7 kids?
I was the procrastinator, so I was the youngest. I waited in line.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right.
And
All right. So when you get to this stock market, as a guy that is, a new stockbroker, but you've been studying this stuff since you were 12 years old. When you start seeing that, hey, I'm having success with this. This is starting to be something that I'm making money. I've seen my parents work hard. What's going through your mind?
yeah, so it was kind of interesting because when I was 18, the first Wall Street movie came out with Gordon Gekko and Bud Fox. And as I was sitting in that theater watching that, listening to Gordon Gekko's Greed is Good speech, I was just like, man, that is so for me. I'm going to be one of those guys that makes it. I'm just going to do it with integrity. No one sets out to think, oh yeah, I'm going to break the law. You think, yeah, I can go about this. I'm just going to work hard. I'm intelligent and I'm going to be a success. And when I was first a broker, I started in May of 94. And the first several months, actually, that was a struggle. I made $5,400 that year, the whole year. And I ate an apple for lunch and 2 chicken pot pies for dinner. It was, I wanted it bad. And so I stuck with it, kept making the 200 to 300 phone calls a day. There's no internet, there's no emails, and just getting after it. Thankfully, as I started the first full year in 96, then everything starts to click. I'm opening accounts, I'm starting to make money. I could pay my bills, and it felt like a dream was coming true. And I was just so busy. I was single at the time, doing nothing but work.
So, was there any fear on your part, Sean, when you're a young guy, breaking 30 years old around that time period, and you're thinking, I'm good. I would say that you probably have got a good amount of head steam of confidence. Was there any fear of you going out on your own, starting your own fund?
Not a whole lot. By that time, I was married, and wife was intelligent, good looking, had a great sense of humor. And the intelligence she had, she understood what I was trying to do and what I wanted to achieve. And by the time I went out on my own, I was starting to have some success, but nowhere near the success I had with the hedge fund. And when I got to the hedge fund, I was making money month after month. I didn't have a losing month. I was known as the guy who never lost money. And that's a pretty easy identity to just say, hey, this is who I am. And wherever I went, it was a good time. People were excited to see me. I was making a money. It was awesome. It's who I thought I was I'm a
Well,
success.
let's, yeah, I want to talk about that because this is something we talked about when we were talking on the phone is that it somewhat becomes addictive, intoxicating, that you're the guy that's making things happen. You're the guy that's making money for people. People start talking, people start wanting to be in your fund because that's the guy. And you started going places and were recognized as that guy. What did that feel like to you as something you've been working for? I think you talked about that you went to this conference and you didn't know that people knew about your successes. Walk us through that.
Yeah, it was tough because these were all my choices. I'm not justifying any of this. But when you're starting to realize, people understand me as a success while you've been working your entire life to break through and become one of those people that are recognized as a success, especially in your industry like finance, where that's all in New York. And that's really the main stage. I knew I was becoming a big deal in Denver, but there was one particular month where, I had had a string that it was really starting to attract a lot of attention, and it was institutional investor attention. The prime brokerage I was dealing with at the time was Bear Stearns. They had an emerging manager book that they'd sent out to their global high net worth clients. They put me in that, my returns in there, the fund strategies in there. People were calling from all over the world to try and get invested in my fund, and my head was growing faster than anything. And what kept me centered in those days was my wife and I had just had our first son when I opened the hedge fund. And each night I was making sure I was leaving the office at 6 so I could get home for dinner, you know, give my son a bath, play with him a little bit, read to him until he fell asleep, scratch his back, and then collapse into bed myself. And that kept me centered because when I got home, I wasn't the hedge fund manager. I was just dad. And it really kept me balanced. And my clients were playing along with it because I was researching and trading during the day, and they were telling their friends about me. So I never had to market the fund. Everything was working out. And that particular month when I'm in that book, I go to New York for a marketing trip that the brokerage had set up a number of meetings for me, and everybody wants in. And it was incredible. I get back to Denver, full head of steam. I'm going to expand. I get called back out to New York for another trip for marketing. That time, I actually got to go to a black tie affair out there at the Waldorf, and Bono was being recognized as the Humanitarian of the Year award. Bono, the singer for U2, favorite band. I get to meet him beforehand at a private party. Just I'm in this room with maybe 24 other people thinking, wow, this is crazy. This is awesome. And the next day before we leave New York, I stop by another major brokerage that I was working with, and I walk onto their trading floor. There's a few hundred traders in there. It's a madhouse, just like you see on TV. There's guys sitting shoulder to shoulder, screaming into phones, screaming across the room. And my day-to-day guy brings me into the block trading area. And I had been trading 100,000 to 1 million share blocks with these guys without ever even meeting each other. And they're realizing who I am, and they're standing up, giving me hugs. all the other people on the floor are like, hey, who the heck's that guy? And, the word's getting around, oh, that's that trader from Denver. And at the time, I was 1% of the daily volume of the ETF, the Qs. So, I was moving some pretty serious weight. And, one by one, a lot of people were coming up, shaking hands. Some of them were giving me hugs, depending on our relationship. And it was complete validation for all of the work, all of the stress. And it's like, wow, I made it. And everything inside of me was like, you
Yeah.
got to hold on to this and keep this rocket going.
Yeah. Because you thought you had made it. And personally, I'm sure that you're living a lifestyle that you would hope to live.
Yeah, it was starting to definitely ramp up. It was more of, I was working so many hours, 6 to 6 every day. And I'd get home and my life was about, being a dad at home. And unfortunately, that same month, we decided to get season tickets to the Avalanche, which is the NHL team here. We love the sport. We love the team. It's great action. Well, some of those games were during the week. And suddenly, we're going out during the middle of the week and I'm getting home at 11 o'clock at night, full of adrenaline, not falling asleep right away. And, I'm showing up to work the next day kind of tired. And really the main factor was not having that balance of getting home and just being with my son and, kind of letting some of the air out of my big head and letting the ego drain down like, hey, this little guy doesn't care that you're a hedge fund manager. Well, suddenly, I'm going to the hockey games and people are, I'm seeing people I know there. And instead of getting deflated ego, it's, pumping my ego up even more. And it just turned into a mess. And so at the end of that month, I hadn't had many trading days. And I'm realizing at the end of the month, I have a loss. And I'm just absolutely panicked. I don't know what's going on. It was miserable and panicked.
Well, let's talk about that, Sean, because that's one of the things that was almost like it scared you because you had been on such a roll where all you had done and been known for is these wins, continually winning. Everybody wants in. What are your thoughts when you see that loss? What goes through your mind about who and what and how am I going to handle this?
Yeah, there was lots of panic. That's the main word I'm keeping using. There was just anxiety oozing out of me, thinking if I tell my clients I had a loss, I'm no longer the guy that always makes money, and they're going to pull their money. They're going to pull my money. My business is going to collapse. I'm going to lose. My wife's going to leave. I'm not going to be around my son as much. Everything I've worked for to that point was going to disappear. And this is all inside my head. And after everything collapsed, and I'm also justifying it by saying, I've got enough of my own money in the fund to cover this loss, and I'll just make the money back up next month. And when you start using that type of thinking, you're gone. There's no turning back. That's one of those points where I wish I would have had, just somebody to talk to where they're just like, dude, what are you doing? And normally someone has it inside their head telling them, hey, you're breaking the law, you idiot, stop. And I was moving so fast, not really thinking about anything I was doing other than keep this pedal floored. You're on a route to success and you're going to get there. Just keep this train moving. Not even realizing how far I'd actually come.
How long does it take for when that happens to you, you take that loss, you start trying to cover with your own funds and you're just trying to cover, and then you've got to double up whatever you did, this month, you've got to make double what you did because you got to cover and make more. How long did that go before the nightmare landed on you that you knew that something was going to happen?
Yeah, so there was a number of things that all were going into that as well. So just like you said, I'm going to make this back next month. You not only have to make that month's profit, but you have to make up last month's loss. The trading strategy that got you there now all of a sudden is not going to work because you just doubled what you have to do. Terrible. And so during that time, I also had an institution that wanted me to manage some of their money, and they wanted me to manage that so that they're getting the statements directly. And so I'm going to be trading for them as well with the hedge fund. allocating trades, and that worked out great. That stayed for 3 years. I was making them money month after month, and they're getting the daily statement from the brokerage. So this has given me fuel to think, well, I'm doing it for them, so I'll be able to get back on track and do it for the fund. Unfortunately for the fund, I've gotten away from the strategy that got me there, and I'm trying to take, bigger trades. I'm holding trades overnight all of a sudden. I'm holding trades for days at a time instead of just, 10, 20 minutes. And it was a ball of mess. And none of it was all in my head thinking, yeah, I can make this work because I'm looking at the information I need, of this other fund that I'm managing profitably. I'm looking at that as proof that I can turn this other fund around, and you're not going to do it. And so eventually with that other fund, that eventually comes to an end after about 3 years. And that's actually what I was living on at the time, was the income from that fund. And I had realized at that point, wow, what the heck's going to happen if I can't turn around, my hedge fund? And I realized, I had a life insurance plan that I had taken out several years before that even paid off in the event of a suicide, as long as it was more than 3 years after the time you take it out. And, at first, I didn't think a whole lot about it, but as I'm starting to get more desperate, I'm realizing, well, how the heck am I going to take care of my family if I can't turn this around? Because at that point, I'm realizing I'm going to prison if I get caught. And I'm like, well, then I won't be able to take care of my family. I'll just have to use this life insurance plan. I'm going to have to take my own life and take care of my family. I mean, that's how screwy my thought process got, thinking, hey, this is actually a viable alternative. Not realizing, the massive hole I'm going to leave in my kid's heart, just the destruction I'm leaving for my wife, it was horrible. And that's how I lived for a while, just every day getting up thinking, hey, I got to go in and make this work, operating from a place of panic.
Yeah, you were thinking, I've got to make this work, or your alternative was, if it doesn't, I'm going to use this life insurance policy, which is crazy how you can get to a rock bottom place like that. And that can be a rational thought that makes sense to you. But there's so many of us that have been at that rock bottom moment where we actually do contemplate that as making sense. Do they just, when this arrives on you, Sean, do they just show up at your door? How does it all come to a point?
Yeah, that was that was April of 2010. I've got 8 people working for me. We're all sitting around the trading desk. It's the middle of the trading day. We're trading stocks back and forth, yelling back information. And on the caller ID, it says it's the SEC on the phone, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's the regulator for, the investment industry. And I'm realizing this is the call I've been dreading. This is it. And it's, obviously they're not calling to congratulate me on being a great guy. So before I even pick up the phone, I'm realizing there's a big chance that I'm going to be dead soon. And sure enough, they're talking, they're asking me about my business, asking me about my clients, the money, who I trade through. And, we're on the phone for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and got off the phone. They didn't want anything at that time. They're just like, all right, well, we really appreciate you answering our questions, and you have a good day. I'm thinking, all right, I evidently just solved that problem. And I went back to trading like nothing was going on. Didn't even miss a beat. And the next day, phone, caller ID, SEC. This is probably going to be a problem. And they wanted to see the statements. They wanted to actually see the statements from the brokerage. And I realized this is bad news. And they said, you got a week to give us these, or we'll subpoena the documents. And I went home that weekend knowing I'm not going to be alive next weekend. The Wednesday comes, the Wednesday night, I told everybody at work, hey, I'm not feeling great. Just take the rest of the week off. And that was that. I went in the next day, I dropped my kids off at school, which I never did because I was always at work by 6 a.m. That particular day, I did, and hugged them goodbye. Got to the office, got tied up some loose ends, and I sent out an email to all my clients and some friends that was scheduled to go out, probably about 20, 30 minutes away from that time. thinking I'd already be gone, admitting to everything I did. I left, a note on my desk along with a thumb drive for the SEC. Hey, this is what happened. This is what I did. No one else knew about this. This is all on me. I'm beyond sorry. So sorry. And walked across the street to the parking garage. It was about 5 stories high. Just, I'm looking out over the city and I go, man, God, some life. And I say that out loud sarcastically. And I jump up on the ledge, trying to immediately just lean forward. And I had on these goofy Ferragamo shoes with a square tip toe, which I didn't even like these shoes. So I don't even know why I wore them that day. But I'm leaning out over the ledge, and no matter how far out I'm leaning, these stupid shoes would not let me lean far enough out to actually fall off this ledge. I'm like, this is nuts. And I look up and there's a bus coming down the street. I'm like, well, surely I can't jump in front of this bus. That's crazy. I'm not going to wreck these people's day. I'll just wait for it to pass and then I'll get back up on the ledge. And, in this time frame, that statement, God, some life, like this is anybody's fault besides mine. It actually clicked in my head. Dude, you did this. These are all your choices. This is no one else's fault except yours. This is you. You're accountable for this. And, I'm disgusted. I'm even more disgusted with myself. I hop back up on the ledge. The bus is gone. Well, by this time, the part of town that my office was in, it's a really, really nice area of Denver. And there's already police sirens, fire truck sirens. They're all surrounding the building. There's a police car already pulling up behind me on the parking garage. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Fire truck, all the firemen are getting out. They've set up the trampoline underneath. I've got nowhere to go. And I realize I'm not even going to be able to jump off this building because these guys, they're going to catch me. And, I decided right then and there, I'm, obviously not going to die right now. And I'm not a hedge fund manager anymore. I'm going to have to make some huge changes, and it's going to happen behind prison walls.
Wow. So what happens next, Sean? I guess the guys pull you down from there. Did they arrest you at the parking garage?
So, that was the first cop that showed up behind me. I really have to hand it to him. He was just talking to me, asking me, hey, what's going on? And I'm realizing the firemen below me. And so I just actually sit down on the ledge at that point and we're just talking through it. And, I'm telling him just, surface level stuff, he's asking me what got you here? What's going on? Can't be that bad. And I told him, hey, my firm's blowing up. My life is over. Dude, your life's not over. I mean, you've got kids to live for. Think about them. And, I had been during the last couple seconds of that. And I'm like, geez, I can't leave my kids like this. That hole is never going to fill in their heart. And, thankfully I came to the conclusion that my kids are going to want me around, even if I'm broke. They're going to rather have me alive and broke rather than an insurance check and this massive hole in their heart. And that was really the first time in several years that I actually put integrity ahead of any other choice, especially success. Because, up until that point, when I was at that corner, that intersection of success and integrity, I was unfortunately choosing success. I was trying to keep that identity alive and it almost killed me. And thankfully, that's just thinking of my sons, it kept me alive and gave me a chance to actually correct those character traits that got me to that point.
What was the thing that happened next, Sean, from that moment there on the parking garage? How long does it take you to get to the point where you're indicted? Did you go to trial?
So I had to go, when you stand on top of a building like that, you typically have to go to a hospital and stay a few days to make sure you're, going to be okay and you're not going to hurt yourself or anybody else. And so
not going to do that again.
Yeah, that 3-day period was kind of tough, but it was also like kind of where the lights started getting brighter again. Like, hey, there's a future without being a hedge fund manager. You still can make this some sort of life, but you have to make some major changes because this guy, I did not want to live with that guy anymore. I did not want to be that guy anymore. I was disgusted with myself. And so I was actually investigated for several months after that. every day thinking I was going to be arrested any day. But, I was cooperating as much as I possibly could with the DA's office with the investigation. Just, it was the only thing that was kind of soothing my guilt of, I've got to somehow make this as right as possible. And, it was tough. And you mentioned about the sentence, I did 14 years, but originally the DA office offered me a 60-year plea deal. And I was like, wow, that'd be a long time to do. I was 42 years at the time, 42 years old at the time. And eventually, we settled on a 40-year number, but it was actually anywhere from leaving it up to the judge, anywhere from probation to 40 years. And I was thinking with the amount of cooperation I did, you know, taking accountability, here I am, I'm going to change. I'm probably not going to do 40 years. And unfortunately, when I went to sentencing 6 months later, he gave me the full 40 years. But in Colorado, you have a parole eligibility date for nonviolent offenders. It was half of that, 20-year parole eligibility. If you don't get any write-ups, it takes another 5 years off that, and you can do programs, and get a couple more months. And so as I'm getting closer to the end of my sentence, CU Denver brought in this prison education program. It was a 2-year program, nothing but communication classes. And it was turbocharged all of the growth I'd already been doing from reading hundreds of books. I got to train dogs, which taught me a lot more about compassion and empathy than, I was practicing in my prior life. And college education just turbocharged all of that growth and synthesized all the thoughts, all
Well,
the growth. Yeah.
Sean, I want to talk about the whole prison experience because, you know, there's a lot that's heavy. I mean, you're looking at 40 years, even though that you can look at it as, okay, then that halves it, and that's 20, and then 5 years of good this, and that's 15. That's still a lot of time. When you went into prison, in fact, let's take a break there because I want to talk about how you handled and ate that elephant that time, and then how you then turbocharged yourself on how you wanted to get out. So we'll take a break here. A lot of people don't like how they show up online. Many individuals think that there's no hope when it comes to managing your reputation on Google. There is hope. It's called the Discoverability Company, and they can help you whether you're building a reputation from scratch, trying to repair search results after a negative news story. Discoverability can also help you how you're portrayed on popular AI services like ChatGPT. To learn more, visit discoverability.co, not .com.co. Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off with coupon code Nightmare Success. And the Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is great space for you. You can join us on Zoom, Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Okay, so Sean, you go in, and there's got to be a lot of things that between you walking in, I'm assuming your personal life is kind of up in the air. Your wife probably didn't know anything about what was going on, but she certainly knew about it once the investigation started, and then you got sentenced. What were you thinking about how you were going to do this unknown world of walking into of a world that you never expected to be in?
Right. Yeah, it was quite a mind adjustment for sure. And yeah, it was at that point, my wife, her entire world had changed upside down. We knew we were getting divorced at that point. She was going to have to start over. And, it was tragic what happened in her life because she had a really nice life going. She was healthy, great mom to our kids, and, her world turned upside down, and she had to figure out how to support the kids right off the bat. And, none of this would have happened. None of my growth could have happened if she didn't be the person she actually was, because she took complete control of that, drove that vehicle, kept the kids safe, raised them. It was awesome. So going to prison, I'm going in, my case was all over the press. I didn't know what to expect when I got there. I'm showing up as a middle-aged white guy with glasses. Am I going to be looked on as, someone who's got a crime that you don't want to be known for in prison, like a sex crime or something like that? Is there going to be violence thrown at me before they even ask me what I've done? You have no idea what's going on. And at that point, I still had in the back of my head, if someone, tries to take my life, well, prison's over. I'm not going to have to do that 40-year
Right.
sentence. So great. And, but I also knew, I got into the finance industry, not saying that's the same thing as, going to prison, but there's a lot of unknowns there. And I had the confidence to know, I got into that industry, I experienced some success with that. When I get into prison, I'm just going to be myself. I played sports my whole life. You're going to be fine. Just get in there, give respect, get respect, and you're going to be fine. And when I got there, sure enough, a bunch of people already know who I was because of the news, the newspapers. And it was almost like one of those things like, all right, well, that's off the table because people already know who I am. And then when you show up and you're 6'5", you kind of stand out. And people are like, oh, well, that's that guy who did that. And, it spreads. And then all of a sudden, it's a conversation piece. Hey, I heard you were in the stock market. Hey, let's talk about that. It's something interesting to talk about. I was always respectful, you know, got respect, and that was the start of it. And so, we get that spectacle from TV, like, prison is, this crazy place full of violence and just nothing but thugs. It's really not like that for everybody. I mean, as far as everybody there is not a
Right.
thug.
Right. I want to talk to you too, Sean, about you talked about the dog program because when I was at Leavenworth, they did do the dog program, but it was a year after I left, and I know some guys that got involved in that, and it was so helpful to them. How did that come to you?
Man, what a break that was. Being a guy that prepares for things before I even surrendered, I had looked to see like what type of possible jobs there were at the different facilities. And I saw there was a canine behavior modification program where the dog lives with you in your cell and you train this dog to be a better dog. And it was amazing when I got to the facility, I saw dogs and I was like, wow, this is really a thing. I got to know all the different dog trainers, ask them about the program, and everybody wanted to do that job because you got to be around a dog, you got a dog, and it was, you got a little bit more money than, the normal prison pay. And the main thing was that program taught me compassion more than anything because when the dogs came in, these dogs were there because they were on their last chance. The people that owned them, the dog had ate the couch or ripped down the drapes. I had one dog that ate the cat, killed their cat. And it wasn't even like at the top of the list of the things it did wrong. It was like, what is up with this dog? And so you're immediately bonding with this dog because it's like, hey, I'm on my last chance too. I'm going to get you through this. And you
Right.
did. You bonded with this dog
Yeah.
and you had it usually for 4 weeks. And the dog went home completely changed. The people would write you back a letter saying, thanks for these changes. And you felt like you were doing something. And it was good for the facility as
Well,
well
yeah, that's
because
huge.
the staff and the incarcerated individuals alike, everybody benefited from that dog being there because the dogs love being petted and everybody wanted to pet the dog. It gave them 60 seconds of mental
Yeah.
release, just, nice, peaceful interaction. And it was awesome to bring that type of
Right.
happiness to the other people there.
How did you, because your kids were, I'm not sure what ages they were, how did you stay present in their lives in that time period that you were dealing with?
They were 10 and 6 when I went in. And again, same thing as their mom. Their life turned completely upside down. I was a very connected dad. I was involved in their lives. And suddenly I wasn't, and I wasn't there. And that was brutal. And there was, out of all the pain and remorse I had, I was very remorseful for the crime I committed. I was remorseful for the lying I did to my wife and to put her in that position. But just how their world turned upside down. Nothing compares to that. Nobody suffered more than my two sons. And their mom, thankfully, understood the relationship I had with them, knew that I still needed to be involved in their lives. And so she always made sure when I called to put them on the phone and to keep building that relationship and really repair that relationship. So the crazy thing is, I was transparent, age appropriate wise, everything I did. Here's the choices I made. This is what I was thinking. This was the stupidity of it. You got to be careful of justifying things. Always be mindful of integrity and who you are as a person. How you communicate with people. How transparent are you? Be authentic. All of those things kept rebuilding that foundation. And since that relationship had to take place over the phone, I really had to listen for what they were saying. There was no, just, oh, yeah, okay, cool. It was, I had to really be present, to understand what they were saying. And, slowly but surely it started to rebuild and it actually got stronger. And that was just as my youngest son was starting college. He got to his college dorm and I called him one night. And it was the same time that I was starting the CU Denver program. And so we kind of got to bond over starting college again at the same time. And I was sharing everything that happened in my life when I was 18 years old, going to parties, dating girls. Here's what you're going to go through. Here's what you're thinking. Here's what you're thinking with the parties, school. Here's what I did right. Here's what I did wrong. Here's what I wish I would have done. Here's how I would correct it. And so it kind of gave him the benefit of knowing his dad screwed up and I was being transparent about it. And so it kind of gave them a little bit of a buffer zone, like a safety net. Well, I'm probably not going to screw up that bad. And so our conversations and our relationships were just so transparent and authentic that, we could help each other through a lot of stuff because there was no BS in any of those conversations. It was real. And being in a prison setting,
Wow,
I was around him.
yeah, I think that's really something, and the fact that you started your college courses when he was going into that same world, and you were both doing that together as father and son. Talk a little bit about that, getting able to take these college courses in prison, because I know there's a lot of different places that I know WashU does that here in St. Louis. What was that like for you?
It was amazing. So when I got to prison, one of the goals I had was to complete some sort of college program. I didn't want to waste that time. And that was one of the definite goals I had. But everywhere I looked, everybody I asked, there was no college classes available at that time. And the only way to do it was through correspondence courses, but you had to pay for those. And all of my money was wrapped up in the hedge fund and all of that was frozen and taken away. It was seized. So I had no money to take these college courses and it was really frustrating. And so when I saw a flyer that was actually up on the wall in our cell house, I was already approved to move to a lower custody facility to go to their dog program and to start transitioning out to lower custody places. And I saw the flyer up offering this program from CU Denver, and it just stopped me dead in my tracks. And I started thinking about it, and it said it was a 2-year program. It's like, man, I could either go to this lower custody facility where, the securities eased up, you have more movement, more freedoms, or, I could get in this college program. And, I really had a heart to heart with myself and I really wanted that education. And so I told my dog boss, hey, I don't want to do that transfer anymore. I'm going to stay here. I'll train dogs while I'm in this college program. She was like, all right, great. I'm glad you're staying here. And my first dog, I brought him to the school with me. I trained him. One of the commands we used to train the dogs was stay. And so I had the dog on a downstay during class. And on the break, I'd take him outside so he could relieve himself and I'd bring him back in and he'd go to sleep. It was cool. But that first class, is Dr. Boyce, Dr. Benjamin Boyce, and it was crazy. The first assignment we had, I get the assignment back, and this was a couple weeks into the class. And, I'm thinking this is a prison program. I'm a pretty intelligent guy. I could just, write this down, write it straight on the paper, no draft, no outline, straight on the paper, well, Dr. Boyce did not roll like that. He gave me a 75%, and I'm sitting in the class going, oh, wow, this is not a prison program. This is actually a CU Denver program. This is college. And I realized right then and there, I'm going to give my all to this program and I'm going to quit my dog job to do it. And I'm going to do nothing but be a college student. And thankfully, the facility allowed me to do that. And I trained that dog for the rest of the month, turned it in. I was sad to be leaving the job, but just ecstatic to be able to concentrate on getting that education. And I went after it with everything. And it gave me everything I was putting back into it. It gave me back in multiple, just because of all the self growth that I had done to that point. Like I said before, that college education, it turbocharged that growth because I could physically feel myself growing as a person. All of the integrity, the humility, the authenticity that I was trying to use every single day, I had to use that all the time in school because of everything that was required. And it was just an amazing, amazing process.
Wow. And what a turnaround from the guy that was standing on the parking garage with the square toe shoes to then just be recharged while you're in prison to find this new energy and confidence and belief in yourself that this is me and what's still out there. When it started getting close for you, what was the process of you getting out? How did the parole work? How did all that happen for you?
Yeah, so that was as we're going through the college, there was a few of us going through those same changes and realizing how big of changes that were going on inside of us. And we started talking about, the conversations we're having with our family on the phone. They're recognizing our conversations are completely different. They're recognizing the spirit we have inside ourselves, the energy, the excitement, and they're complimenting us back like, hey, you've actually changed. You're talking about different things. Your mindset's different. You're a better person. And the people around us that are in the classes, we're talking to them about this, and everybody admitted to going through that same thing. Yeah, my family's recognizing those exact same things. And so when new students were starting to get into our program and the other programs, we were telling them, hey, this is what's going to happen. But you also are blessed with, getting to use these laptops while you're over in the school. So you can't screw this up using these laptops for anything else other than school. Otherwise, they'll take them away from us and we'll have to handwrite our homework. We're doing real college homework. You don't want to have to write your homework. And so we're protecting that facility, the education with everything we have. And as we're going along, there's rumors that there's a House bill coming up in the Colorado legislature that they're going to take a year off your sentence if you're a nonviolent offender. They're going to take a year off your sentence if you complete an associate's degree, and they'll take another year off your sentence if you complete a bachelor's degree, and more time if you get an MBA. I'm getting close enough where it's like, wow, if I get this associate's degree, I would immediately be eligible for a halfway house. So I'm thinking, wow, I need to get these classes done to complete this. So when this bill is actually passed and signed, I can benefit from this and, get out back into the world, complete my bachelor's when I get out and start this over. And so a couple months later, it passed, in the state house, and the governor passed it. And I was the first person to benefit from it to actually get a year taken off my sentence and to be immediately eligible for that release. And thankfully, I passed the halfway acceptance and got out. And when I got to the halfway house, I was excited. But as I was leaving the facility or the prison, I was also like, oh my gosh, I've done all these changes. And a lot of it's been because of the school education. How am I going to complete this when I get out? And so I'm taking that 2-hour bus ride back to Denver, not knowing how I'm going to complete my degree, but knowing it's something I have to do as part of just living because it's that big a part of me. And when I got out, Dr. Hartnett from CU Denver, he called me and said, hey, I want you to come take a tour of the campus. I want you down here. And so I get a pass. I get down there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to figure out how to get on this campus. And he goes, well, we're going to get you enrolled. Dr. Hartnett, the deadline passed for enrollment 2 weeks ago. I think I missed this semester. no, no, we're going to get you enrolled. And the school started a few days after that. And I was enrolled and I was in 4 communication classes right off the bat, taking a full load. The halfway house allowed me to do that for my job. They said, as long as you stay on the campus and you don't give us any reason not to trust you, you can do that for your job. And that's what I did.
Well, Sean, for like, you've been in prison for 14 years. You roll out into this situation where you're on a college campus. What in the world were you thinking in your mind with all this sensory overload of being out of prison? What was that like for you?
Yeah, that dawned on me too. As I'm taking the train ride down there, like, well, that's cool. You're going to be on this college campus. What an opportunity. But I'm 56 years old at that time. I'm 6'5", I'm bald. I'm gonna, you know, well, I'm still thinking, well, I'll just blend in, I'll be quiet in class, I'm just gonna get my degree. Incognito is what I called it. And I show
Right,
up to
right,
the
right.
first communication class and it's with Dr. Boyce, the same professor I had when I was inside. And I'm looking at, the syllabus, the first few minutes of class, and I see in like week 6, there's this article called Educated Incarcerated Individuals, an Easy Choice. Well, I actually co-authored that article with one of my students when I was inside and it was published and I'm panicking. And I'm like, oh my God, everybody's going to know I was in prison. And I talked to him after class and he goes, oh yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that. And, would you mind addressing the class that week and talk about your experience? Are you crazy? I'm trying to remain incognito. And he goes, no, Sean, that's not going to happen. You're 6'5", you're decades older than everybody. And even on the first day of class, you're already speaking up in the discussions. There's no way people are not going to ask you questions. You may as well just embrace this. And thankfully, there was a student that sat behind me and she was constantly jumping into the discussions as well. And she had thrown out Dicerteau, which is a French philosopher. And I knew that was one of Dr. Boyce's favorite. And I was asking her afterwards in the next class, I was like, hey, that was kind of interesting. You mentioned Dicerteau, and I think he even threw in Michael Foucault. Have you taken his classes before or something? He goes, oh yeah, this is my 4th class I've taken. It's like, hey, same here. I've taken a bunch of his classes too. And she's like, hold on a second. This is where I've been doing all my communication classes, and you've taken all these classes. How have I not met you before? I would have remembered you. I mean,
Uh-huh.
she was trying to be as nice as possible. She goes, you're bald. I was kind of like, I may as well just come clean. And, I told her, and she was completely cool and accepting about it. And she goes, hold on a second. She gets her laptop out, and within like 15 seconds, she pulled up the article and she goes, this is you. And I was like, how did you pull that up already? She goes, he uses this in all his classes and he talks about the prison education program. All right, cool. So the road was kind of like paved a little bit. And by the time that week 6 rolled around to actually, talk to the class about it, I had already told several of the students, but I was also comfortable enough with the rest of the students to get up and, just authentically talk to them about it. And there was no pushback whatsoever. And, they saw I had, real communication. I took accountability, told them about the growth, told them about the prison education program. And they asked some good questions. Some of them were hard hitting. Some of them wanted to know what I was thinking when I was breaking the law. And you just share the truth. And it was all part of the growth and helping the prison education program grow, just bringing positive attention to it.
Wow. What a great story. And I think there is so much in what you shared a whole lot right there, Sean. And it is, I think, so freeing to be able to stand out in front of your story. If you don't own your story, somebody else does. And what they see and they own is whatever's that narrative is that's out there. But being able to share your story, how it happened, what you felt like when the choices came, how did that come about? All of a sudden, people can start relating. Nobody lives a perfect life. Taking accountability and bringing people along to understand, maybe helping someone when, they get stuck in the same type of situation. And this is where Sean hit his fork in the road. All of those things are freeing to somebody, that's because there is the other feeling of, if you're an ex-felon and you walk into a room, you're always wondering, well, I wonder if he knows, or I wonder if she knows. If you're standing out in front and owning your story, then there's a different type of confidence that you share with yourself, that I'm not hiding anything. This is me. This is me. Like me,
Yeah,
don't like me. This is me. And that's what you've been able to do. And then I think, was that kind of the beginning of you feeling like, hey, I ought to kind of do a little bit more of this speaking stuff?
that the confidence you met that you just mentioned, that was really that was a big part of it because I was really disgusted with what I did. When I first got to prison, there was a lot of people that were just amazed at, the dollar amounts being thrown around, and they wanted to talk about that and glorify that. And I wouldn't take part. I was just like, no, I'm telling you, I'm disgusted with what I did. I'm here to fix the character traits that put me here. I've I've got to change that. And, that combined with the fact that, the case was in the media, I was kind of like on a stage. And when I was saying I was going to make the changes, now all of a sudden you actually have to make the changes because you said you were going to. And if you don't, people are going to be constantly putting you on blast while you're in the facility, like, hey, you said you're going to change. That doesn't look like change. And so you're starting to have to be accountable all the time to people who are world-class BS detectors because they've manipulated people their entire life. They know exactly what it looks like when you're manipulating or BSing somebody. And so they'll call you on it. And some of these guys, you don't want them to call you on anything because they're dangerous people.
Yeah.
So during that time frame while I'm making those changes, I'm realizing, there's people around me asking me, "Hey, how are you doing this? I'm seeing you're at peace. You're always reading. What are you reading?" And I'm starting to share a lot of those books. Brene Brown was just so influential with all of her research that she shared in her books. And that research started because of the struggles she had earlier in life. And she wanted to know how to just deal with those. And she shared that struggle. And I knew it was helping me. So it had to be helping other people because she has like 5 best-selling books. So that is actually meaningful stuff. And then there was another author, Jerry Kalana, who wrote Reboot. Same thing. A lot of struggles earlier in life, shared the struggles, how he dealt with it, how he grew from it. And he was sharing them with other people. And I was like, hey, this is actually what you're supposed to do when you're learning from these struggles and these lessons. You have to share it. And it gave me a platform to share it when I was inside.
So the other thing that I thought was interesting too, Sean, is that, you did really well at school. I mean, summa cum laude, that's the top of the heap. But then you got the opportunity to serve on the University of Colorado Denver Prison Education Program Advisory Board. Tell me a little bit about what all does that do?
Yeah. So I get to share my perspective as somebody who's been a student inside, but also see how, the university program works on the outside. And by being involved in that, I can see what the professors are talking about. I can see what the administration is talking about. And I know what the incarcerated students are talking about and what they need and what they want, how the program can be delivered to them because technology is a concern. Security is always a concern. That's always the overwhelming concern for the facilities, saying, hey, this is what we need to keep in mind here. This is what they're going to be saying here. And that's turned into actually a coalition now. It's called CCHEP, which is Coalition of Colorado Higher Education Prison Programs. And that's a coalition of all of the universities in Colorado that deliver college education to incarcerated students. And there's also nonprofit organizations like the Alliance of Higher Education in Prisons. The DOC is involved. The state education department is involved. And there's a reentry facility or a reentry program here in Denver called Remerge. They're also involved. So all of these different spokes on the wheel that make sure this college education happens, they're all at the table that we meet once a month to make sure this gets delivered as efficiently as possible. And one of the most meaningful things I've done in my life this last summer, I got to participate in a research project where a few of us interviewed the successful programs around the country that have delivered higher education inside prisons. States like New Jersey, Florida, Maine, Michigan, even all of the universities inside those states, and Georgetown's another one, just incredible program. Talking to them, hey, what did you do right? What would you change? What do you think needs to happen in the future? How does this work better? Asking them questions, all of that. And we're writing the final report now that's actually going to be unveiled at a national conference in April. It's the NCHEF conference that's put on by the Alliance in Cleveland. And we're really excited to, deliver that, what we found, and share that with the rest of the country so that everybody can grow together.
Well, that's incredible. I think that's so meaningful work, impactful work, is to take everything that you experience, getting your education on the inside, and you getting your education on the outside, and you can basically all those things intersect to make it better. And then taking all the pieces of where everything is everywhere else that's going on in the nation and try to take the best of the best. And all those things, I think you have a formula. What's your formula that I saw you walking and sharing the other day on your social media?
Uh,
It starts with
95,
43.
95, 43, and 5. So college education,
That's it. 95,
why it's
43, and 5.
important. 95% of our incarcerated population is eventually going to be released back out into the community. So you have to ask, do you want them released back out with the same skill set that put them in prison, or do you want to help them grow while they're in there? And then 43% lower recidivism rates for people that to get to experience college education while they're inside compared to those who don't. And then $5 of recidivism expenses are saved for every $1 invested educating somebody while they're inside. And those are just three
That is,
no-brainer facts.
it's powerful facts, because those are big, and recidivism, is so crazy when we look at it, the 2/3 and 3 years, and the 3/4 and 5 years, and how does that all happen? There's a whole bunch of reasons why, people, education being one, people not being able to get housing when they get out, people having to, struggle through job opportunities. But the education piece can change a lot of those pieces, because in those job interviews, somebody who's had that education confidence experience, they might handle themselves more confidently on how they're going to go through that job interview than someone who's just not been able to have that opportunity. So I think that's a huge, huge piece of what you're helping with, Sean. If I was going to ask you what your biggest takeaway was through all this experience, what would you think?
Well, mindset is the biggest key for anybody in this life, is what I've learned through all of this. That's the biggest differentiator. What's your mindset when you start the day? What's your purpose? What's most important to you? And before, when I made all these mistakes, I had embraced success as my identity. I thought everything in my life was because of my identity. I thought if the success ended, my identity was going to end. Everything I had was going to be gone. Once I changed that mindset and really analyzed, hey, what put me here? What do I need to do to fix these things? That mindset was always my GPS to get me through the day. And it's allowed me to get to this point where now I can share those lessons with, other hedge funds, private equity funds, university business schools, compliance groups, and share them. Hey, this is my exact story. This is what I was thinking. This is how this developed. This is why I wasn't thinking about this or justifying this. Those philosophy, psychology, and sociology classes that I was skipping at the first time I went to school, those were gaping holes in who I was as a person. And so when I got to actually experience those classes and embrace that knowledge, I became a full person, and it allowed me to, spin my life up instead of, spinning down, which most people, when they get out, that's why the recidivism numbers are the way they are.
Yeah. And the other thing I love about your story, Sean, is that, this show goes into 1,200 prisons on the Adovo platform, and just your story of how you did what you did will hopefully encourage some people who are on the fence thinking, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? Here's a guy that actually got charged and more confidence and belief going and changes of mindset into being able to bolt out of prison as opposed to um, there's always struggles when you get out reentry. It's always tough, but giving yourself as many tools as you can is what you want. And I think this is going to be helpful for people to hear that.
Yeah, I think the main thing, that system where your podcast goes on to all of those different tablets in all those different facilities. Kudos to the guys that are actually taking that first step of trying to rebuild their life and actually make those changes when they have the opportunity. One of the biggest things, and this is in most facilities across the country, but the 7 habits of highly effective people from the Frankly Covey organization. If your facility doesn't have the program, the 7 habits, you have to get your hands on that book and just use that as your daily guide because it'll change your life and it'll change your thought process and your habits, and that starts building. And then another author, Weldon Long, who did 13 years, got out, had a really successful sales career going. He wrote a book called Power of Consistency, same thing, and gives you an exact detailed plan of what he did. And it turns out part of his book was based on his changes were based on Stephen Covey's 7 habits. And so those two things, and then Brene Brown, I can't say enough about, and then Jerry Kalana as well. You just have to find the authors that resonate with you, that give you fuel to keep those changes going. Just use the accountability every day. Surround yourself with people going through the same things, trying to grow, share what you're learning with each other. And you're building your credibility first with yourself and then with other people. And that college education, if you can get it, that's just going to continue to build that credibility.
So true. So true. I want to give a shout out to Homestead Financial, who lets me use this podcast studio and the fancy camera and lights. If you've got home mortgage needs out there, Greg Aftiev is your guy. He knows all that stuff. As Sean's getting his book ready, Fuel to Change, Turning Setback into Strength, I've got a book already out there. So if you're going to Amazon, go check out Nightmare Success, Loyalty, Betrayal, Life Behind Bars, Adapting and Finally Breaking Free. If you got time, leave me a review on Apple. I love that. I love reading those things. It helps the show too. If you want to know what I'm doing, go to brentcassidy.com. I spell it wrong. I spell it with a TY, not a DY. And as I used to say, as I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Sean Mueller, wow. I love your story. I love how you just took a hold and just started walking the walk. And now you're helping people. And that's inspiring stuff, man. Just keep doing it.
Well, I appreciate it, Brent. I appreciate you giving me the time and opportunity to talk with you today.
All right, folks. Nightmare Success, in and out.